Christian Nationalism Part 2. Why are some Christians so concerned about power? So, our second kind of foray into Christian nationalism, maybe if we kind of focus this on power. So the use of power, misuse of power, historically, how it's been used, and then what we're seeing today taking place. We talked a bit last time about our kind of respective backgrounds and the differences in how we'd grown up and our
Quite
church
different,
experiences. So I wonder if maybe we just share a little bit about our different kind of understandings of power within that kind of Christian concept. So I was just thinking about it in terms of a kind of different of theologies and kind of different understandings of God. And I'm struggling when I kind of look back on my kind of childhood growing up in the church to think of like really clear examples when the sort of the kind of overwhelming power was being expressed.
Whereas I grew up, and the stand-in for power would be authority. Mm-hmm. There was a huge emphasis on authority, and specifically who had authority and who didn't have authority. I mean, I think it starts with this idea of the Bible as being the ultimate authority and the inerrant authority. So you can't question it, and then
so it's probably worth just unpacking that a little bit. So for anyone who's watching that's kind of grown up within a church context will probably be aware that there are different approaches to the Bible and to the scripture. And
not necessarily if you grew up like me, because I think that we weren't really ever, our approach was the only valid approach to the Bible, right? And anyone else who didn't agree with our approach to the Bible didn't really take the Bible seriously. That was the kind of sense I had growing up.
Yes. So any kind of alternative view you might have had on a passage or verses or something like that, you would check it against the kind of authority figure, whatever that would be, whether it was a person, pastor, or... Well,
there are certain kind of accepted viewpoints in kind of evangelical Christianity. And, you have to toe those lines. I mean, God is all powerful. God is holy. God demands purity. God, because he's holy, he can't abide sin, and so and then of course he had to send Jesus as the punishment for sin, and you have to accept Jesus, and that's how God can abide you, and everything has to be fit within that narrative, and that's how I think things outside of that narrative, you could have differences, I guess, in interpretation, but there's this overarching narrative, and it starts with seeing God as this kind of powerful, wanting purity and holiness, and even though the Old Testament's really full of social justice and God being concerned with justice and Jesus being concerned with the least of these, that didn't really, I don't have a lot of memories of that playing a part of my understanding of the Bible.
So partly that's, what you're talking about there when you're talking about and particularly the sort of power dynamics that were in play, the theology that you're describing there would be part of what we call atonement theology. Mm-hmm. Which is the kind of systematic way of understanding what was happening when Jesus came, when Jesus died upon the cross. It's a kind of a whole story, a philosophy, if you like.
Theological construct, right?
Around
to understand.
To help people understand what was taking place there. I just did not grow up with that understanding of the cross, and what it's about. So, and over the years, as much as I've tried to read about it and try to understand it, I still don't quite
make
get
sense
it
to you.
Yeah,
it doesn't make sense to me any longer.
Yeah, now that you've deconstructed from that,
that was all I'd been taught. That was all I knew, and
just to be clear, in that theology, the kind of interplay of power is a huge part of what is going on there, and the role of God as the ultimate judge who inflicts punishment on those who have not lived well their own way. Now, and of course, there is not just one view of this. So if you're deeply into Calvin's theology and thinking about predestination, there's an understanding there that you don't even have any choice in it. You have been preordained to go to hell or to heaven. So eternal punishment or eternal, and really there's nothing you can do about it. Now, all of that just seems, I mean, it always felt completely nutty to me.
Yes, I wasn't raised Calvinist. That wasn't part of my background. But I think what's really interesting about this kind of power, this seeing God as this ultimate power who doles out punishment or reward based on how well, and it's really based on how well you conform to a particular theology. So that actually gives enormous power to the men controlling the theological narrative. And it's always men in this, right?
99.9999% of the time.
Well, certainly in the churches I went to, it was always men who had the power. And that was, I mean, I remember being taken to a Bill Gothard seminar as a teenager, and that was all about, I think it's the Basic Life Institutes, and there are kind of documentaries made about that. And of course, Bill Gothard was removed from power because he was abusing his power. He was kind of preying on young women and girls, I think. He was removed from power. But that was all about the power structure that God has ordained in their worldview, which was God, the husband, the wife, the children, and daughters, and with umbrellas, and you had to stay under your umbrella, and if you stepped outside of your umbrella, you'd be attacked. You needed to stay under your authority in order to be safe from attack, and daughters are to stay under fathers until they get married. I mean, there's no... I mean, women are very controlled, as are children.
Within this, what is a patriarchal structure.
Very patriarchal. And they're quite upfront about that, that it's patriarchal there.
It's no great surprise to anyone. That's within that community or understanding. So when we then are talking about Christian nationalism and this kind of framework, as we've been talking about it, for understanding the world and the role of people within the world, maybe the role of God within that, but it really, Christian nationalism is not really a religious movement. It is more of a kind of political framework that utilizes religious symbols and language.
Yes, and I think if you can use God to legitimize your power, then that's quite a handy thing, isn't it?
Yeah, that's pretty powerful. That is like the ultimate, I was going to say trump card, but then that gets a little bit confusing, doesn't it?
Yes, well, I think I just, there was James Tallarico. I think he's a state representative in Texas.
And he's a pastor.
And he's a pastor.
Yeah.
He's a state representative in Texas, and he's been kind of speaking out against Christian nationalism. It's one of the things he's doing, even though he's in seminary himself. And I think he was saying that, as a Christian, he doesn't want a theocracy, because the only thing more dangerous than a dictator is a dictator who thinks they're empowered by God, right? So they kind of have almost impunity because they know what God wants. He's definitely worth checking out in terms of kind of Christian nationalism, because he speaks really eloquently about it. But yes, I think using God to legitimate political aims
is, the thing is, though, it works.
It does.
Yeah. So that's why people do it, because it works really powerfully. So that maybe brings us back to some of the roots of Christian nationalism, which I mean, really, you could kind of see it going all the way back, the expression Christendom, when the Roman Empire converted from
kind of 300 something.
Yeah, 300 AD kind of thing, to the Christianity becoming the state religion.
Always a bad thing.
Yeah, then it became absolutely entwined in the power structures of an empire, a whole empire. And really from then on, we've been seeing this kind of tussle taking place, but how religion, symbols of religion, are used within a nation. And here in the UK, we have the Church of England. Mm-hmm. In Scotland, we have the Church of Scotland, like it is possessive.
Like
there's a connection
church
between the nation and the church, rather than it being like in Ireland, you have the Presbyterian Church in Ireland. So
right.
and that little difference between in and of.
Not really ever thought of it. But,
but it's quite a powerful difference there in how folks will understand the relationship between church and state. But in the States, in particular, we see the kind of development of Christian nationalism, and we mentioned this just in passing last week, the idea of slaveholder religion and the kind of connections there in how religion was being used to defend a system of governance and power.
Power over. And the Southern Baptist Convention, I think, is just a continuation.
Today.
Yes, today.
The existing.
Is kind of continuation of this kind of, and that's what I was raised in, was this kind of slaveholder religion.
So what do we mean by slaveholder religion?
Well, in the American South, Christianity was used to control the slaves, right? So there are lots of passages that talk about, slaves obey your master. Slavery is kind of instituted in the Old Testament. So there are plenty of passages that you can use to defend slavery. So slaves were taught Christianity, and they were heavy on these obey your master kind of things. And then there's this kind of reward in heaven. If you whatever tribulations you suffer here, if you do what your master says, the Bible says you need to do what your master says, then you're going to be rewarded in the afterlife. So it is this huge system of control. And I can even see that in my own life, because I was desperately afraid of going to hell as a child, right? So it was used to control the slaves, but it still is used to control members of the group today. I would consider evangelical Christianity a fear-based religion, and this fear is used to control, fear. So the slaves as well, fear of going to, you think it's bad now? If you don't obey, guess where you're going? It'll be even worse. If you obey, then
you have a chance.
You have a chance of a reward. So, right, and that kind of power dynamics, it still goes on today, right?
Yeah. So, if anyone's seen the film 12 Years a Slave, there's a whole scene in that film, if I remember, it's been a few years since seeing it,
I've seen that,
but where the kind of plantation, the slaves are all gathered for the
Yes, a little
worship
yeah.
service that's led by the owner of the plantation.
He's a pretty awful person.
Yeah, funnily enough, yeah. But it's made clear in that scene the use and abuse of certain passages in the scripture in order to defend the status quo. So there's you've already got a power system in place, and in the American South, where it was, absolutely dominant to the way of life, the culture, the economy was based on slavery for labor. So you can see how the sense of identity of belonging in that group of kind of Christian nationalism was very selective for the folks who were part of it. And then, of course, we end up in the Civil War, which is the whole fight over whether this can continue on.
Well, the slave states wanted to extend it out to the west, and with the election of Lincoln, they kind of realized that they were going to struggle to do that. So then they seceded, and that was it's all about this kind of expansion of the slave-holding way of life.
Yeah. Now, after that, you have so you have this civil war, this huge fight that's over. So internal in the United States. And of course, there are other influences from outside the abolitionist movement that was all around the world. You have the time that follows the kind of Reconstruction period. So once you've got these new laws that had been put in place that gave equal rights.
Well, at first, it was pretty successful, right? And you had black members of
10 years Congress, or so, about a decade, and then things started to roll back.
The Empire Strikes Back, right?
Yeah,
that kind of thing. Yes,
because you had those who had been slaves that were actually getting into positions of power within the states, and then that huge pushback that took place. And then that continued on for another 100 years until the Civil Rights Movement.
In the 1960s.
And so that's all the images that you see of the kind of separate water fountains and all that sort of thing was all part of that pushback that had taken place. And there's a famous film, isn't there, Birth of a Nation? There's a silent film from 1914, I think it is, or something like it, around about that.
Is it Coolidge that played it in the White House?
In the White House, yeah. And it is about that period, and in that Reconstruction period, and then the kind of fight. Well, the fight back against it,
and it glorifies the fight back, right?
Yeah,
so it's very
there's
racist
depictions of the Ku Klux Klan as
positively,
the kind of heroes in that scene. So again, it's how the power is being used, or who has the power, the fears over of that sense of you're relinquishing power, or you do not have the same power that you once had, which is what those who are white in the southern states, in the former slave states in the US were feeling, that they needed their own identity to gather around in order to coalesce and form a movement that would fight back.
And they were very successful for a long time.
Yeah, and that is, the Ku Klux Klan, it was all in that period. and they're wearing, the outfits of, if you go to, is it Spain or Portugal, where there's a kind of religious, where they're wearing basically the same kind of
Right.
outfits. So the Ku Klux Klan had kind of adopted these. Again, this kind of religious symbology, later burning crosses and all this sort of thing.
Yes, well, yeah. I mean, Christianity has always, unfortunately, ever since Christianity became associated with power, it has a long history of being associated with abuse of that power. I think, that's the thing that makes me so sad about it is that Jesus was all about challenging power on behalf of the least of these, and that is what this kind of Christian nationalist version of Christianity is, just the complete opposite of what Jesus was about.
Do you remember when we went to the Vatican and we visited there in 2019? And I remember going around the museum in the Vatican, and the artwork, the relics, the archaeological specimens that there are, it is absolutely astonishing what they have there in that collection.
And in a day, you couldn't have seen it all.
Oh,
we were there for a day, but I
think I maybe went
lots
round
of places I missed.
Yeah, I think I did. I don't know if I even did a third of the museum in the whole day that we were there. But the thing that was just rattling around in my head, alongside thinking about the value of all this stuff that was there, is what on earth is this got to do with
following Jesus?
Yeah, what it is to be a follower of Jesus
question.
and to live that out, and I still I struggle with that in the Church of Scotland's own denomination. Is we get so caught up in some of the issues related to basically to power issues, and you feel like you're just losing track of the things that really counted to Jesus and what his way of life was, which in so many ways was a pushback against the powers that be at the time. Yes,
because the powers were doing a lot of oppressing. I think that quite often is the nature of power, isn't it? When you have power and you're not accountable, then you can justify taking advantage of other people, I think, and that happens a lot. It's one of the reasons why democracy is so important, is that there's pushback and there's accountability at the next election, which I think is one of the reasons that I find the Christian nationalist movement in the States so scary, because they aren't about democracy, right?
Yeah.
They quite openly, some of them don't want democracy. They do want.
So, for many years maybe in the years not long after we were an item and together, and exactly, because it's covering like 3 decades now.
I know.
You'd hear quite a lot when you were, especially in the States, and sometimes having discussions. I remember discussions that we used to have with the wider family when we were in the States, that were looking at what is the role of the church in a society, and there was often quite a strong argument that was coming from the folks in the States that would be coming from a more right wing side of the argument, that really anything that was to do with kind of care, social care, health care, even education, should be a part of the church's role as Christians kind of saw things, and that it wasn't so much the place of the state to be involved in those things. So the state, military, that kind of thing. Yeah,
common defense. That varies, right? so you do have a lot of these very conservative Christians who have the homeschooling movement really took off in the kind of 80s, 90s maybe. And that is the idea of you don't want your children corrupted by the world. Bill Gothard's Basic Institutes was a big part of that. The more you can insulate people from contact with people who are different, the more you can keep them part of your group. So you see that. In my family, it was mainly social care issues and caring for the poor and those kind of things. I mean, we went to public schools, and my parents didn't homeschool, but any kind of welfare issues, that should be taken care of by the church. So they would be against government kind of safety nets or would want to see them really cut back. But of course, there just isn't the only entity that's able to, one, create the kind of level playing field where everyone has a chance to make it is the government, right? Because when you make, I mean, those are political decisions, aren't they? How we're going to structure society, how much taxes people are going to pay, all of these kind of things. And that kind of creates the environment in which all of us are swimming. But then also, no one else has the resources to meet the level of need that our kind of post-Thatcher, post-Reagan society has created, where you have huge amounts of wealth going to the top and then not as much left for everyone else. And a lot of people have been left behind, which is which I think then feeds back into a lot of the kind of Christian nationalist sentiment, this feeling like that there's this some good old days that we could get back to where God and country and things were better back then. And if we could just go back to that, then life will be better for me. And I think that's one of the ways that Christian nationalists gather power, this kind of nostalgia for this kind of mythical past, but
it's funny because we were talking about it a bit earlier. In Scotland, the most of the education was provided by churches through to the end of the 19th century, kind of 1872, I think the Education Act in Scotland was passed, which it then became law that certainly for kind of primary education was mandatory, and then the state then, because it had to be provided, the state then had to get involved and so the churches gave up a lot of the schools that they had that then to be taken over by the. Of course, we have the
still have non-denominational and
denominational Catholic schools still in Scotland as part of our makeup. But that was, I mean, part of that was because there was this recognition that in a particular area, it might be an affluent area, or there's the local laird, the local landowner is particularly generous, and so he provides the staffing for the local school. But in another area, that just wouldn't exist. But it feels like in that argument is about trying to return to this almost kind of feudal system of those who are, provide out of the goodness of their souls the things for those who are the poor, needy.
And a lot of times it comes with strings attached, doesn't it? Right? You have to kind of go along to a service, or you have to to be honest, churches are very good at providing for their own in the States, but they're not really providing for the most part. Not the conservative evangelical church, that they're not really providing for people out with, because that's the world and they're bad and they need to become Christians first.
Yes, or it's part of a strategy for conversion of folks becoming members of the church.
Yeah.
Yeah. Don't hold your breath for that not happening here, because that feels like kind of where things are moving in the Church of Scotland at the moment. And again, this is out of fear of losing position and power, and it's about money rather than necessarily being about the gospel, about bringing good news to people. So now what has changed in the last kind of decade or two, I guess, is that, and this, well, it'd be from the kind of 90s onwards again, the movement gaining traction of the religious right, and groups like the Moral Majority and things like that in the States, is that there seems to have been this a movement away from that kind of sense of, well, we will just do our thing in our communities, and that is what we are kind of witness to God at work, to no, we need to take control of everything for everyone.
Yep.
And that is now, I'm sure that was in the back of a lot of folks' minds, going back down the decades. Oh, if only we could get to that position. But now it is happening.
Yeah, and it's been a long journey. I mean, when I first deconstructed, I remember doing a lot of reading, kind of about, kind of Christian, right-wing Christian ideology, and came across Rushdoony.
First name?
Oh, it escapes me at the moment.
Yeah.
I'm sorry.
I will shove it on screen.
Yeah. And I think his family had immigrated to the States from Armenia. Is that right?
Yeah, I think it was Armenia.
Anyway, he developed a very Christian Reconstructionism, which basically said we need to establish a Christian theocracy based on Old Testament laws, which seems odd since Jesus came to fulfill the law, right? But anyway, and a lot of people in the world I grew up in wouldn't have known the name Rushdoony and wouldn't have known about Christian Reconstructionism. But as I was reading it and reading his ideas, I can just see how they permeated the kind of mainstream Christian evangelicalism I was growing up in the 70s and 80s. They were really seeping in, these ideas of being separate from the world and needing to remain pure from the world, and, kind of protecting your young people, and all of these things that were just part of what I grew up in, even though no one I grew up with would have said they wanted a Christian theocracy based on Old Testament law. I mean, it might be different now. I don't know. I couldn't speak to that. But it's been a really long process. And so these ideas were all coming around. And then, of course, you had the Republican Party in the kind of 70s and then into the 80s realized that you could activate people with...
Well, it would actually wouldn't it be a little bit before that with Nixon?
He was late 60s, early 70s,
and
yes.
This is like the reactivating, in a sense, of the kind of slaveholder religion side of things.
Yes, and it was in reaction to the civil rights. So they were first able to activate...
poor white...
Right, against desegregation. Mm-hmm. And there was a big thing where then there were a lot of Christian schools that started so that their kids could be segregated. Mm-hmm. And then, of course, they eventually realized that this was a loser. You weren't going to be able to kind of sustain this as you're moving into the kind of 70s, and it's becoming less acceptable to be overtly racist.
And it was full-on institutionalized racism.
Definitely.
Going on.
So then they moved to abortion, and then that became this animating idea. And it really was when they realized that racism, they couldn't be overtly racist anymore. The power over kind of Black Americans, and so then it moved to the abortion issue, with some of the homosexuality issue as well. But again, it's this power over other groups. I mean,
So that's
the power dynamics are
really
always...
when you're talking about activating, what is being activated is, you mentioned that we have this vast inequality in wealth in most developed countries now.
It's been getting bad for the few
so
decades.
And for a lot of folks that are in the kind of middle downwards, they can be really struggling just to make kind of ends meet and
I
to
think now
raising
you have
families.
people working a couple of 2-3 jobs and still struggling. And these are political choices we're making.
Yeah, but in order to get the votes of this large group of predominantly white, but folks that would maybe have a high school education but not further education, would have been in kind of manual sort of jobs, the blue collar workers as they're described in the States, but maybe then struggling even to find work in the same way that they would have done where you grew up in a career and you worked in the factory, or whatever it was, that those jobs, it was becoming harder and harder to find work. Well, in order to get them on side, you point to another group and say, but the problem is them.
Yes.
And it's actually just
today,
and
we'll give you power over them, right? So that's been going on in American history for a long time, because a long time ago, I think in the 1600s, they, your ruling class realized when you had black indentured servants and white indentured servants and whatever, that if the indentured servants got together, then that was a problem for the ruling class. But if you could tell the white poor, you're not black, you're better than the blacks, then you could maintain your own power by offering tastes of it, on the basis of race. So that's been going on for a long time.
Yeah, and that's why labor movements were so powerful, because they brought that sense of
kind of class solidarity.
Yeah, of people that were predominantly working class folks, and giving them a voice to stick it to the man.
We need to recapture some of that, I think, where we're kind of
the way things are headed. So that's part of that kind of creating this division in order to, and this is within the democratic societies, in order to gain the power of those voting blocks as a part of your coalition of voting. But it feels like things have taken a kind of step from that kind of, where it was still, you might think these were kind of somewhat fringe groups that were involved, to now you have got actual, folks that are secretaries in
Pete
huge
Hegseth,
departments who are absolutely advocating for theocracy.
Women to lose. So just recently, Pete Hegseth,
who's the defense secretary.
Positively retweeted a clip from a show about Doug Wilson, who is this guy who is kind of Christian Reconstructionist, wants the theocracy, wants to repeal the 19th Amendment, which is what gave women the right to vote. And Pete Hegseth is a member of a Doug Wilson affiliated church, I think, and is on board with this. And of course, it isn't just, actually, Christian nationalism isn't just the kind of conservative evangelicals that I grew up in with. There is a faction in the Catholic Church that is equally pro-theocracy, and they seem to have captured the Supreme Court. There's been a concerted effort to put kind of quite radical conservative Catholics on the Supreme Court, and they're,
and that is working.
It is. It is working. Yeah. They've got a 6-3, 6-3 captured court,
and are overturning their own judgments from the past.
Yeah, it's crazy.
Yeah. So that's
and all to give power to the kind of straight white men. Really, that's what we're looking at, where women are losing control over their own bodies. There are, I mean, they allowed, there was a legislation in place that kind of southern states couldn't make voting changes without going through a commission to make sure that they weren't disenfranchising Black people. Well, the Supreme Court said, oh, no, racism is over. You don't have to do that. Of course, all these southern states rushed to then do exactly that, disenfranchise Black people. I think there were even maps redrawn in North Carolina, which clearly were diluting the Black vote to reduce their representation, their political representation. And I think the Supreme Court said, well, yeah, they are doing that, but it's a legitimate political strategy. Yep. I mean, so we're really talking, and I mean, certainly, I think Clarence Thomas has taught,
who is one of the
Supreme Court justices, is open to overturning Obergefell, which is what kind of legalized same-sex marriage. I mean, so a lot of these hard-won rights and protections are being, I mean, not just chipped away, but completely obliterated by this theologically conservative right-wing court. It isn't just a right-wing court. There are religious ideas at work there.
And all revolving around power, who wields it, who controls others. Why? I mean, that's where... So the book I mentioned last week that I've been reading, that's based on that's kind of survey, so it's more statistically based, thinking about Christian nationalism. It does make the point that there, and I think I mentioned this last week, but there is a difference between being Christian nationalist and those who are kind of practicing their religion, and you see it in some of the questions. So if you kind of equal everything else out, then, if you ask questions about immigration, it would tend to be that those who are more, would have more tendency of supporting Christian nationalism would be opposed to immigration.
Right.
Whereas the more you're practicing religion, the more you are open to the other and seeing others.
Yeah, I find that really interesting, because it doesn't really square with my experience in my own family, right?
Yes.
It's different than it's different than my personal experience.
And yeah, I mean that, and it applies across other things. There's like interracial marriage, where if you're practicing a faith that you'd see more, or the role of police and violence towards Black people. There's a number of things they're kind of looking at, and so it just makes it. Well, I find that a little bit hopeful, in the sense of when people are understanding a bit more about Jesus
message
and what Christian faith might be, that actually that maybe pushes back on otherwise some of the Christian nationalism messages that might be part of them. And I think that, I mean, here in Scotland, where sectarianism, not so much in Aberdeen, but on the west of Scotland, sectarianism is a big thing, which is the kind of divide between Roman Catholicism and Protestantism, that you have this historical antagonism between the two, which still exists today, but whereas in the past it was rooted in religious kind of differences, now it's just tribal.
It does.
It feels, it's a bit like Christian nationalism. It has become its own kind of thing, and the religious kind of side of it is almost getting separated out. But it uses a lot of the language and the symbols that are part of of religion within that. And again, that was about control and power within communities, and mostly the Protestants who had power. They tended to own the businesses, so they had power over who was employed, and so it caused a lot of grief.
It's crazy, isn't it? All of these us and them, all of the damage the us and them narratives create for people, isn't it?
Yeah. I wonder if that's enough on power
Probably is enough.
for tonight. It is just a huge part of what is going on and what we're seeing in the world today, in the United States today.
It's a little bit scary, the people who have power at the moment and are quickly consolidating that power.
Yeah. Okay.
Yep.
Next time we'll pick another topic.
Aspect.
Another aspect of it. It might be that kind of thinking about the sort of the patriarchal side of things, the kind of relationships between different groups might be somewhere to have a look at.
A lot to think about.
Indeed.
In that.
Okay.
All right. Okay, we're back. And I just thought I'd talk a little bit about a book I've been rereading called Food for Life by Tim Spector. I'm gonna
Grub. I think I'm gonna like this.
I'm not sure you're going to.
Oh.
So I mean, being a woman of a certain age, your various
Mature and wise.
Your various ailments are kind of reasserting themselves. And I think I listened to this book a couple of years ago, right after I'd done the Zoe program. So Tim Spector is a very well-known scientist who studies nutrition, and he and some others have done this Zoe program where you it checks your kind of gut microbiome, all of the the microorganisms in your gut, which have a huge impact on your health, and it checks how well your body deals with sugar and fat and all of these things, and gives you food recommendations. So I did it a few years ago, realized my body didn't deal very well with sugar, cut out a lot of the kind of white carbs, and have tried to get you to do it as well, and you've resisted.
It feels like sometimes those carbs are the most fun. That's the challenge.
Yeah, but that's the whole microbiome thing, is that when you eat those white carbs, you're feeding the microbes that like them, and then they send signals asking for more of them. Whereas then if you just switch over to a more whole foods, then you're feeding those microbes, but then it makes you want more of those. Anyway, I've just been feeling a little achier than normal, and so rereading this kind of Food for Life, which kind of goes through all the different kinds of foods and the effects that they have on your body, and the main message just is eat whole foods, lots of plants, lots of variety of plants. Mm-hmm. All good.
That's all positive.
So it's pretty simple. So I guess it's hard. You get back into going to back at school, and time is a little bit short. It can be easy to kind of grab the processed stuff, but just kind of trying to remind myself by reading this book that I'll feel better in the long run if I do take a little bit of time to cook something whole foods so you're not at, because these additives, a lot of the additives that are in ultra processed foods that we use, we don't really know what they do to our bodies, and we don't really know what they do to our microbiome. Probably not great things. The evidence is. Anyway, so just as a little middle-aged woman thing, that's what I've been rereading.
What in the sort of big organizations that would tend to do the sort of diet plans and things like that, do they take that sort of thing into account, or is it more kind of calorie kind of based? Now
you're asking. I suppose there maybe are some. I mean, I think the Zoe program, I think people have had a lot of luck. It's been good for maintaining weight or losing weight, or it isn't a diet program. It is just giving you kind of scores for foods on a scale of 0 to 100, and you want scores closer to 100. And these foods are good for you. They're going to give you energy.
Is
they're going to make you feel
on a particular, actually on a thing, or is
yes.
there and
it's individual for different people. So I have Mine came back as my body deals with fat really well. But my not so great dealing with sugar. Like I think I might even have been in the kind of pre-diabetic range. So it did change how I ate. I mean, we used to make these veggie burritos, which I thought were really healthy, but they had a lot of white rice and then a white tortilla, and they spiked my blood sugar. But different people react differently, so it's all kind of personalized. And so I think that, they're not marketing it as a diet program, but it is, I think that is a side effect. I mean, I think a lot of diet programs are about calorie counting. I think that, but if you're eating whole foods, then you're getting a lot of fiber, which is going to fill you up. It's a lot faster. And so you can eat a lot more while still maintaining weight, I think, Again, as a woman of a certain age, these things become more important.
Well, it's about providing information about what works for you.
And the effect different foods have. It does vary between people. Like I think your sister did it, and her blood sugar control was way better than mine, So she could have white rice. Others think she still felt like she shouldn't really have white bread. Really wasn't a good thing for her. But so it does vary. But there are general through lines. White refined carbs not very good for you. Sugar not good for you. Saturated fats. Well, I think there's more debate about that, but certainly whole plant-based food, very good for you. Eat a lot of that, and you can get away from a lot of the I don't think calorie counting is terribly healthy, right? And where you get your calories makes a big difference. I mean, some of it is like cutting out the ultra-processed foods, because I think in the Food for Life book, there is one study that they cite where groups of people were given calorie-controlled meals for a couple of weeks, or anyway, if they were given access to whole foods for a week and ultra-processed foods for a week, and just eat whatever you want, and they all said it was all good. They liked the whole foods, but when they were eating the ultra-processed foods, they were eating a lot more calories.
All right.
Because I think it's, they want you to eat more because that's that's how they sell. Anyway, Aren't you really interested in that? You love talking about eating more plants and cutting out refined carbs, and
it is challenging. It is challenging. Yeah,
we're on the same wavelength politically, but not so much when it comes to food, I don't think.
No, I think that's fair to say. All right.
Back again.
I was thinking about this week a film that
unusual.
Yeah, I do like a movie.
You do,
and I think I sort of have a soft spot for movies that are like complex in their production, or even for.
Or there's a story behind.
There's a story behind them, or or even like sort of B movies that are. You might objectively say pretty terrible, but it's clear that somebody or a group of folks put their heart and soul into creating this flawed thing, and so to
give them some support.
Well, or just to appreciate the
effort.
That somebody had tried to create something, and then maybe it didn't go so well. Anyway, that is by way of introduction to a film that has a horrendous reputation, which is the film Caligula. So this is a film that was made in the late 70s, kind of 78, 79, I think it came out, not in the UK until 1980, I think it was.
Right. This passed me by. I don't.
Yes. It's a historical piece about
Caligula.
The Roman emperor. It was the screenplay is by Gore Vidal, the famous novelist writer. It has Malcolm McDowell in it not long after he would have been playing Alex from The Clockwork Orange, a real pivotal kind of role in another very, very controversial film, of course. Helen Mirren is in it in a relatively young role when she was young, and it has Peter O'Toole in it, John Gielgud. So these really big actors that were in it, the writer, and the director is a guy called Tinto Brass, who has created some other films, very controversial films. One called Salon Kitty, which is kind of about Nazis. But the thing about this film is that it was produced by a guy called Bob Guccione, who was the founder of Penthouse magazines.
Nice.
Yeah. So this film was created as this story about the life of Caligula, and then when the kind of it was being edited together after. I think the actual filming process was very difficult and kind of all sorts of budget things going on, money issues that were going on. But when they got to the point of editing the film together, Bob Guccione was like, oh, yeah, it's all very good, but it's not, it doesn't have the va-va-voom that I want as the founder of Penthouse magazines.
Oh, I dread to think.
Yeah, so he then went in with another film crew and some of his adult film actors to film all this other stuff. So on the sets where the film had been made,
the stars had been acting.
Yeah, and then in the edit, these blue movie scenes were interspersed through the film. So Tinto Brass, now who has produced some other films that are laden with
that kind of stuff.
Yeah, with sexual imagery. Said, oh, I don't want to have anything to do with this film. And Gore Vidal
Fair enough.
He'd said, oh, I don't want to have anything to do with it. Most of the actors were like, oh my goodness, what on earth is going on here? So the film had this horrendous reputation as being a complete car crash, but a film that had all of this talent in. So it's a kind of fascinating kind of
story.
Film. Yeah, the story behind it.
Yeah.
So when I have seen it a few times, and there are umpteen versions of it because there are all these sort of different edits of it. So I don't even know what the version is I've seen, but you kind of had this feeling that there was a film in there trying to get out, and yet it had just been kind of destroyed by everything else that was going on, and particularly Malcolm McDowell, his performance as Caligula. You could tell there was something going on there, but it was such a mess in the edit that the whole film it was hard to follow kind of what was going on. Well, that film has just been re-edited by somebody else, and so that was the version I was just been watching this week in stages
because it's quite long.
It's nearly 3 hours long, so it's
I would
watching
never
it.
Make that.
Yeah, well, I did it in like hour long chunks, but. They've done an amazing job, and I think they've actually found other takes of scenes. So it's not even you haven't seen it before, these scenes, and the film all starts to make sense. Of now, what you didn't get in the former cut is that Caligula just seems mad. He just seems completely bonkers. When this film, the way they've edited it, you see the progression
of the madness
from somebody, and it's all to do with power, of course, and being given this power, and then the misuse of the power in it. So the performance of Malcolm McDowell in it really comes out as being an absolute powerhouse thing. So anyway, the scene that really, when I was watching it this week, and it was just after watching some of the scenes from the White House of the kind of cabinet meeting. Goodness,
that was so embarrassing.
So Donald Trump with all the kind of this, and they all have to go round, and each person has to give we're so proud to serve you, and you've done amazing things for the country. It's North Korea on steroids kind of stuff going on.
And I think that meeting lasted almost as long as the movie.
It was about 3 hours long.
Yeah, crazy
by the time
stuff.
Everyone's gone round.
And I mean, how everyone's not cringing with embarrassment. I've just seen clips of it and think,
it's astonishing. So there is this scene in the film where so there's been this real kind of down point for Caligula, and he's lost his sister Drusilla, who's died from fever, and he kind of goes into this spiral, and he ends up in a prison amongst folks in the just in the population. They realize then who he is, and he gets out of that. But he's kind of had that experience, and then comes back up and into the Senate, and so you mentioned about how people utilize God for their own power. This is what he says: I have existed from the morning of the world, and I shall exist until the last star falls from the night. Although I have taken the form of Gaius Caligula, I am no man, as I am all men, and therefore I am a god. And then he says, I shall wait for the unanimous decision of the Senate to approve him as a deity, as a god.
Kind of feels like that's where America is, doesn't it?
Yeah, and of course, I mean, there was that as a part of the kind of Roman Empire cult of the deification of the empire was a part of that. So there's like silence in the Senate as the absurdity of what is being said by Caligula, who is all kind of covered in mud because he's just been in this prison as he goes into this situation, and so he screams, "I!" And then somebody else says I, and then somebody else says I, and so they all start popping up saying, agreeing with this in the Senate, and then Caligula transfers his I into ba, and then has all the members of the Senate bleating like sheep, and. So I just saw that. I think it was I saw it that same day that this thing had happened. Of just people absolutely bending over,
prostrating themselves,
giving up their,
making fools of themselves. I mean, losing all dignity. To bow down before the emperor without any clothes.
Yeah. And in this film, literally without any clothes for much of it.
Yeah,
it should be said. And when you go to the U.S. Senate and you look at some of the Republican senators, some of whom know better than what they are saying.
Well, the Republican senators
they just get in line and
the Republican senators who are doctors who confirmed RFK,
RFK Jr., who's the head of the
destroying the CDC, the Centers for Disease Control in the States. There have been all these walkouts, and people are going to die. Staff are
walking out. He's tried to fire the head of the CDC, and staff are now saying enough is enough.
I think there were 4 Republican senators who are doctors, and they voted to confirm him, knowing full well what a disaster it would be. Yeah.
That is it. They're just following on.
The same story.
Yeah.
Just
there's then
2,000 years later.
Yeah. Well, that's exactly it. I mean, this is it's a story written, and I think the kind of historians' take on Caligula is that he maybe wasn't quite as horrendous as the kind of mythology around him has been, because the stories around it are truly horrifying. Yeah. However, people that are given absolute power,
never a good thing.
This is what happens.
Power corrupts, and absolute power corrupts absolutely.
Caesonia is his wife in it, and she asks him at one point after he's made this ridicules the Senate, says, "Do you have to make your contempt for the institution so obvious?" I mean, this is really
spot on, isn't it?
And the film is, 45 years old.
I wonder if they're re-releasing it pointedly.
Yeah, well, maybe it was a. He responds, yes. She says, why? And he says, it is my inspiration to ridicule and put others down.
The followers, that is.
Yeah, there's one bit where he sees the folks that are just bowing down to him, and he screams out, I hate them all. So there's this weird dynamic, isn't there, that you have, and I'm that must be the case with somebody like Trump.
Oh, absolutely.
He needs all of those words of support, and yet there's a part of him that realizes that it's all a show. And that there's this hole and void in his soul.
Well, and he has ultimate contempt for his voters. You can see it in the way that he just flat out lies to them, and then passes legislation that's going to hurt them. Well, I mean, it's just, so sad.
Yeah. But there you go. So Caligula, the ultimate cut it is.
So you're making me curious to go and watch it.
It is definitely worth a watch. It's not for everyone. I think Helen Mirren, much later, said something along the lines of, well, it's a wonderful combination of art and genitalia.
Well, there you go.
Yeah.
There's a recommendation.
One take on it. So, Caligula, the ultimate cut. And a reminder that these games about power
have been going on for a long time.
Yeah, they are nothing new. All right. Enough for this week, you think?
I think so.
Okay. See you, folks.
Bye, everybody.
Bye.